All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us here once again on Rich Brown Rewind with me, Rich Brown. See some of you already here joining us tonight for this very special tribute we're going to be doing to one of my favorite performers of all time, Mr. Benny Bell. We've got a couple of great shows coming up. We're going to be looking at our holiday special that we had done on Beyond Vaudeville with our director, Steve. We're going to be doing a tribute to the world's only mother-daughter comedy team, Coco and Penny, with Penny, which is really cool. We've got a show coming up with the guys from the Roy Radin Vaudeville Show band, which is going to be really, really cool. And we just digitized our 1988 live show that we did with Adam West and some great guests, including Sammy Petrillo and our wonderful Suzanne Muldowney. And we're going to unlock that as soon as we hit 3,000 subscribers. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Wrangle every friend you have to become a subscriber to help unlock that video. We already have in the chat NSR saying greetings from Nova Scotia. Hello up there in Nova Scotia. You can join us in chat. Anyone watching, if you have questions about Benny Bell, we're going to be answering them tonight. And we have the perfect person to talk with us here about Benny Bell. Benny was, he started doing shows with us at age 85, ended up dying in 1999, unfortunately, but on the bright side, he was 93 years old. So Benny won't be here to talk to us about his life and career, but we are, luckily, going to have with us Joel Sandberg, who did this book about Benny Bell. He wrote this book. Joel is a writer. He's going to also tell us a little later about a special novel he's working on that is going to involve a character very similar to his grandfather. So without further ado, let's please welcome Joel Sandberg. Hi, Joel.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Thank you so much for having me. I would have, even if I wasn't home, I would have taken a ship to get here.
A reference to one of your grandfather's great songs, Go Take a Ship for Yourself. We're going to be looking at some footage of your grandfather on Beyond Vaudeville. He actually, he was on our show Beyond Vaudeville back in 1991. Ended up doing 2 of our live shows at Caroline's in 1993. We have clips of that stuff we're going to look at. He also was, when we went over to MTV on Oddville, he was on 2 of our episodes there, which was pretty unusual. Like Benny ended up doing quite a few shows with us, which was a thrill for me.
And I have a lot of them on video. You remember this thing called VHS, right?
Yes, I do remember VHS, and thankfully it existed so that we could digitize all this stuff and be able to show it. I thought maybe we'd, Joel, kind of look at some photos, which you had supplied some great photos from the family history, and we can kind of talk through your dad. And as I mentioned, we'll answer any questions that any of you might have. And let's call this up. Here we go. All right, let's start at the very beginning or close to the beginning.
That's Benny Bell before he was Benny Bell on the right there.
Wow.
And, his older sister, I can't remember her name, but she's on the left there. And it was a very musical family, as you can see. It's a great shot.
So he was born in 1906 on the Lower East Side, and one of the things that I loved about discovering Benny Bell's records, back in college was, finding these albums in thrift shops and kosher comedy, and it just, to me, like listening to these, they just brought me to that time of like the Lower East Side in the earlier 1900s, and It was just so genuine, and he grew
Right.
up there.
You know, one reason why it was like that, why you got that feeling, I think, this is my armchair analysis, is because there were no outside influences from anything outside of the Lower East Side. In other words, there was nobody in Midtown Manhattan or in Los Angeles to influence him, because he was his own writer, arranger, director, producer, distributor, publicity manager, distributor. He did everything. So everything Lower East Side about him made it onto all of those albums. He took the photographs, he designed the cover, he'd
Wow.
write the liner notes. Everything about every album, and he had quite a few, as you probably know, Rich, was him through and through, A to Z, front to back. So that's why he felt it that way.
You can almost smell the pickle juice on these records. Now, does your dad have like payas there, or is that just longer hair that he had?
My grandfather.
Your grandfather, sorry, yeah.
Could have been very religious family. They weren't Orthodox, but they were quite spiritual in their love of Judaism. His father, my grandfather's father, so my great grandfather, wanted him to be a rabbi or a cantor, and he was interested enough, he told me, to consider that. Of course, music took over, and that was the path he chose. But yeah, that could have very well been Payas, the old Jewish Yiddish side locks.
So here's your grandpa when he was a bit older. So he's a young man here, and I don't know what, his 30s maybe, or
yeah, I'm thinking so, maybe 30, 35.
And now he never gave up on this pursuit of music, and it started early, right? He was like 15 or so when he decided he wanted to be a songwriter.
Yeah, he was a big fan of Irving Berlin, and the first song he remembers learning how to sing and learning how to play on the ukulele was When I Lost You by Irving Berlin. He decided at that time, and I can't remember the exact year, but he was a very young teenager at the time, that he wanted to be a songwriter just like Irving Berlin. He wanted to be Irving Berlin. And as a matter of fact, and the reason I'm mentioning that is because he wanted to be that kind of songwriter, a serious songwriter, not the novelty stuff we all know Benny Bell for. He started out wanting to be a serious a songwriter with dramas and love songs and heartfelt renditions of life of the era. And that's how he started. And he just always had an affection for music, and he picked up instrumentation very well. He was a very good guitar player, a very good arranger, more than people give him credit for. Because the novelty stuff, he only had like 4 or 5 or 6 musicians at each session. So he didn't have to arrange for a lot of instruments. But on the rare occasions when he did, if you really listen carefully, you can hear some really sophisticated stuff that he did as an arranger. If he wanted to, he could have been big in show business as an arranger alone.
I love the sound of his the instruments on his songs. So this is his wife and your grandma Molly, yeah?
Yep, that's Grandpa Benny and Grandma Molly. It looks like they were young marrieds then, young newlyweds.
Now, he met her, he was 17 and she was 14. Is that right?
I think so. Something like that. I write about it in the book, so you can look it up later. But yeah. Like that.
And they ended up being married for 67 years. Yeah,
they were more than just husband and wife. They were friends and lovers and confidants and partners. She adored him. She knew that he was nuts. She knew that he was crazy. He drove her nuts by his stubbornness, and a lot of times they didn't have any money, but she stuck by him through everything and never left his side. Had greatest faith in him, and they stayed together all those years until her death. And when she died, a huge part of him died too.
Now you mentioned that your dad was your granddad was. I mean, he did have his eccentricities, right? And he, in the book you mentioned he was very untrusting and wary of people in the record business. He was stubborn. He was often broke. But obviously a great love and affection that you had for him and your family had for him. But he was a quirky guy. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, look up the word quirk in the dictionary and you'll see a picture of Benny Bell. I mean, he would, no matter where he was, he would be singing or humming. Even if he was depressed about something, no matter what was going on in the world, he was always thinking of new lyrics in his head. He always had a joke at the tip of his tongue. His main goal in life, from my analysis of the situation, was to make one person, at least one person every day, smile or laugh. If he did that, it didn't matter if none of his records sold. Then he was a success if he made one person smile or laugh. And I was always, during his visits to my house, I was always that one person.
A good audience, and there they are with their two sons. And which one of these is your dad?
The bigger guy, Jerry, that's my dad on the right there, and the younger one is his brother, Charlie.
Got it. Okay. And now this was interesting. I read about this in your book. So this was in 1928. It was recorded by Hobo Jack Turner, who was actually Thomas Ernest Hare.
Yeah, right.
Who was one of the Happiness Boys. I mean, he was kind of a big star in his day.
That's why nobody could ever discount the success of my grandfather, despite the fact that only people like us, of course there were thousands of us, but only people like us know of my grandfather. But when Hobo Jack Turner recorded that was a big deal because he was nationally known at the time. And my grandfather was, what year was that? 1920?
1928, I think.
17. So he was only like 20 years old, my grandfather, when he sold this song. And he did a lot. My grandfather at this time, and as you yourself said, this was the Lower East Side. He used to look out of his window and see bums and hobos and pushcart peddlers all the time. And it struck something in him as being very colorful and very real and very New York and very honest, even, because that's what they did. And they did it with aplomb. They loved doing what they did. And he loved writing about it. And many songs back then that he wrote were about bums, hobos, transients, in one way or another. This was only one of them. He recorded several himself. Hobo Jack recorded a couple beyond the Bowery Bums. And that was that was my grandfather's thing for a while, songs about hobos.
Wow. And and then on the sheet music there is Benjamin Sandberg. That's the name.
That's before he selected Benny Bell. Yeah.
Benny Bell. This is a great shot, which now he made this for his Take a Ship for Yourself, which was one of his earliest novelty tunes. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
And
yeah. He did the bum songs, sold a couple. He did some other songs that weren't about bums and weren't novelty, and they didn't do so well. And then somebody told him, somebody at a big record company, a friend of his, and I think I write about this in my book, told him that novelty songs seemed as if they were going to be up and coming soon. Why don't you try your hand at it, they said. So he did. And I don't know if Take a Ship for Yourself was the first, but it was the first that actually sold a whole hell of a lot of copies all through the New York metropolitan region. We're talking more than 20 or 30,000, which at that time, considering that he didn't have a major label behind him, it was all his own company. And it was pretty good.
And Dennis Devine is writing, I'm aware that Benny Bell owned his own record labels. In addition to his songwriting and performing, was he personally involved in the technical side of recording the sessions?
Yes.
In a word, right?
I was there. Well, I was there when he did it later on in the 70s. But yeah, he cut the records. He bought the vinyl. The only thing he didn't do was have them pressed, because that's a whole other thing. But yeah, he actually did the actual recording. He did the levels. He did the mics. He did the setup. He did the re-recordings. All he did was bring the master tapes to another company so that they can actually press it in bulk.
And this was all done in a basement in Brooklyn, or he had everything jammed in there, all the equipment?
Yes. After he got married, he grew up on the Lower East Side, which is actually Manhattan, the southern tip of Manhattan. But then when he got married, he moved to Brooklyn. That's where he spent the whole entire rest of his life. And in the basement, he had two apartments. The last one was on Elton Street. That's the one that I knew as a boy. Whenever I went to visit him, it was at his Elton Street apartment. And in the basement, he had his recording studio. He had lots of equipment, a lot of which ended up years later in my own basement in my suburban house out on Long Island. And yeah, it was fascinating for me to see and fascinating for me to watch.
Now, this was a drawing he did. He did drawings for some of his artwork for some of his albums, and pretty accomplished.
He was an excellent artist. If he didn't want to go into this, and I say this about a lot of things that I say about the things he could have done, if he didn't want to go into music, he probably could have been some sort of graphic artist. He was very skilled. I've seen several of his sketches of himself and of just, street scenes and waterfront scenes. And I don't think he ever had any formal training. He just had a knack for it.
Just bursting with all this creativity. And this is, I think this was on the album for Pincus the Peddler.
Yeah, I think it's not the production shot. I think it was a test shot just to see where he was going to go with it.
Okay.
But this is an iconic shot for me because it reminds me of one of my favorite movies, Mary Poppins. It reminds me of Bert at the very beginning when he's playing all those instruments. And I remember very vividly seeing that movie and I was only about 5 or 6 and turning to my parents and saying, that's just like Poppy Penny. And they agreed with me. He was a lot like that, a jack of all trades in many ways, actually.
Okay, so this was the copyright for Shaving Cream, which became his big novelty song, the one song that everyone best knows Benny Bell for. And this was going way back to the 1940s, right? 1946.
Yes, it was first copyrighted in 46.
So he was originally, and I have some of these. This is a. This is a 78 I have from his Bell label for Benny Bell. And this was Gelt, Gelt, Gelt was this song, vocal by Benny Bell. But a lot of the novelty songs, like this one, this was a Cocktail Party songs, Shaving Cream. He was making these for jukeboxes, a lot of these, right?
Yeah, that was where most of them. That was where the publicity came from, all the jukeboxes around the city.
Mm-hmm. And eventually there would be authorities would crack down on these songs because they were double entendres or too suggestive. And that made him a little paranoid, right?
Yeah. And that's about when he went from Benny Sandberg to Benny Bell. He just wanted to do whatever he could to sort of insulate himself from direct exposure as one of these naughty guys.
And this Shaving Cream, now eventually this Shaving Cream got rediscovered thanks to Cousin Brucey playing it on the radio and Dr. Demento playing it.
Yeah, well, yeah, in the reverse order. It was Dr. Demento who played it first on his show a bunch of times, and then Cousin Brucey picked it up in New York, and then it exploded.
And but I was confused when I was a kid when this came out that the vocals were by Paul Wynn, and I love Benny's voice, and it was great to hear his version of it. But Paul Wynn, it was a friend that did that, and it was done as a way to kind of shield himself from legal, from possible problems with authorities, or
there were several recordings of Shaving Cream, including several by my grandfather in his voice. But I guess they tried at one point to exactly what you said. He wanted to shield himself even further, even beyond just being called Benny Bell as opposed to Benjamin Sandberg, by using somebody completely unknown who they couldn't trace back to him. So he did one version with that guy. Every version was a little bit different in instrumentation. And I think that they just wanted to see which one sold. And he was probably hoping secretly that it would be the one with his voice, but it happened to be the one with Paul Wynn's voice that caught on in the New York jukebox circuit. So that's the one that a lot of people heard back then. But it was my grandfather who ended up performing it everywhere back then, on vaudeville stages, or what were left of vaudeville stages in the 40s, which weren't many theaters. And in the Catskills, he played it a lot. So he was able to maintain his association with the song that he actually wrote.
Mm-hmm. And Tom Smith is writing in the chat, it's an astounding feat that Shaving Cream, recorded in the 1940s, became a top 40 hit during re-release in the mid-70s. I'm blown away by that. It charted at number 30 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1975. And I'm guessing your grandfather was equally and pleasantly surprised by all this.
Yeah, when he was invited to do a live remote at WNBC with cousin Bruce Morrow, um, and the phones just lit up. It was crazy, cousin Bruce. He said, and as a matter of fact, Billboard wrote about it a couple of weeks later. Their station manager, I think his name was John Lund, did an article for the magazine in which he told the story of how from nothing came this monster hit that everybody wanted to hear constantly. And they were playing it 2 or 3 times an hour throughout the day. And as a matter of fact, during that interview, all this happened so fast. During that interview, that live interview on the air, I was at home in Westbury on Long Island. I was just sitting in the kitchen. I think I was listening to it. And in the middle of the interview, the phone rings, and it's my mother's brother who lived up in Spring Valley, New York. And that's within the 50,000 watt clear channel range of WNBC. And even though it was a phone, and my mother was answering it, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, I heard his voice. He was saying, "What the hell is this?" Because he had got all these years before that, he was in obscurity after the hits of the 1940s. Few people heard about him in the 50s and the 60s, and then all of a sudden the 70s, it's what the hell is this? And from then on, it was just crazy. He was all over the place after that.
And that was the sheet music that he had for it.
Mm-hmm.
The 70s revival, I guess, or that might have been.
No. Well, it does say published by Madison Music, which was his original, but it also says Vanguard Records on the left there. So it was probably a hybrid.
Yeah.
Like I told you before, he did everything, including the sheet music. He would not only write the sheet music, but he would design the sheet music, and he would take the pictures. So I'm sure Vanguard, as a matter of fact, I'm positive Vanguard had their own sheet music, but Benny Bell, being Benny Bell, had to do things his own way. So he came out with his own Shaving Cream sheet music, and he made sure to give credit both to Vanguard Records and to Madison Music, which was his company.
We have a question here. Throughout his life and career, did Benny always retain the rights to his recordings?
Until he died, yes. Now I have them.
Okay. Stayed in the family.
All in the family.
Which and it's interesting because his songs, the last reboot of The Gong Show on network TV, they were singing every single week. They sang Shaving Cream.
Yeah, they called me up, and because they needed my permission for that, since I retained the copyright, and I was very curious as to why they wanted to do the same exact verse every single week, and I even offered, for a price, of course, to write new lyrics just for the show, but they turned me down.
And Shaving Cream also showed up not too long ago in the latest Halloween movie, right?
Halloween Kills with Jamie Lee Curtis. It was in a karaoke scene where some guy is singing Shaving Cream. Yep. Drew Carey has talked about it a few times on the game show that he hosts. For some reason, he sometimes just breaks out into a verse of Shaving Cream, and the weirdest places it shows up.
Okay, this is just a sampling of the records. Benny Bell put out 114 records that he made by himself, and these were just a few of them. And I love all the artwork and the songs, and a lot of these songs, people can hear these songs on the internet, right? His library is pretty accessible at this point.
Yes, there's actually the one at the top right. That's not an album; that's sheet music. But
okay.
But that's okay. You're allowed one mistake per show.
And I guess Sweet Violets is also a sheet music, right?
Yes. Now, as you can see, this is a very eclectic. I'm glad you put this together. This is very, very interesting because it's a compendium of all the different kinds of things he did. You have the Shaving Cream album, which is a bunch of his novelty hits, and that's the reissue from 1973. And then you have the Kosher Comedy. You have 2 of them, one on the top left and then 2 over. And that's something that we don't really talk about. His Kosher Comedy, and it wasn't only comedy, it was some Yiddish language songs and some Yiddish comedy songs, and they happened to be very successful in the Yiddish communities in New York. If you were to go back, as I did, and look at some of the playlists of some of the old radio stations which don't exist, the Yiddish radio stations in New York from the 30s and 40s, you would find Benjamin Sandberg listed many, many times. He had a lot of airplay with that stuff. Now, of course, you have a limited buying audience with that, and it won't become popular nationally for obvious reasons. But his kosher stuff, his Yiddish stuff, did very, very well. That's something that I probably should look into even further and write about it in some way. And then he had that one, the second one from on the top, second one from the left. That's my father in the middle, and that's Benny Bell on the left, and that's my mother's father on the right, my grandfather Dave Mogul. That's at his wedding. And that was an album. It's like a concept album, like they have self-publishing, and this was like self-record making just for that one event. I don't know if this sold even 2 copies, but it was a novelty for the family, and it holds a special place in my heart because of the picture of my father and my 2 grandfathers, both of whom I adored. And then you have the Pincus album, which is another interesting story because we haven't talked about it, but Pincus the Peddler was a novelty song that was unlike Shaving Cream, but very special in its own right because it was one of the first story songs. Mm-hmm. It was a story song about a peddler who comes from Russia to New York, and he doesn't have a good time here, and he does something terrible because he's frustrated and angry, and he has a temper to begin with, and then he gets kicked back to Russia. It's like a whole mini movie in 1 2.5 minute song, and that was a big jukebox hit in 45 or 6 or something like that. And this was a whole album just based on that. And
it's a great. I love Pincus the Peddler. It's a great song. If anyone listening hasn't heard it, look that song up. It's great. And the thing that gets him sent back to Petrograd, he meets a woman.
A dirty, rotten woman.
A dirty, rotten woman. At first, she made me happy. Then she made me sad.
She lifted her umbrella, so I kicked her down the cellar and broke the nicest girdle that she ever had. Then he gets sent back to Petrograd.
And the thing I love about your granddad's recordings too was like it wasn't her girdle; it was her gladle.
Gradle, yeah.
He had that great New York accent.
Yeah, my grandmother used to say turlet instead of toilet.
Mine too. Yep. And here's just another example of Benny working it, doing his thing. I don't know where this ad appeared, but he was just always hustling himself with his label, right?
I have a folder full of ads like this, all different kinds, all different shapes, all different sizes, all different publications. He was always promoting himself. He was always pushing some scheme or another. He just tried and tried and tried. I have a diary. I don't know if it's a journal, I guess, that he kept before he broke through with Pincus the Peddler and Shaving Cream and Take a Ship for Yourself and Everybody Loves My Fanny. Before all that happened, he was trying to sell songs and it was going miserably. And he probably had what today we would call a nervous breakdown. Wow. And if you were to read this journal, you would cry. Your heart would break.
Wow. Yeah, and it from what I had read in your book, he really was always just having to do well. He'd have good times and bad times, but he'd be delivering phone books or working as a peddler, working as a busboy, and just doing whatever he could to keep bread on the table for the family.
Yeah. He had a bunch of different kinds of jobs, but he would always quit to go back to show business, such as it was.
Yep. And then he had these other endeavors that he would do. His mind just seemed to be going a mile a minute. But this was a book, The Most Authentic and Factual Report on What Men Know About Women. And what was the contents of this book?
About 20 blank pages. I have that book. That's what it was. It was just a novelty book, and he published it himself, he printed it himself, and he walked it around to all the stores in New York City by himself to see if the store owners would stock a few.
And then there was this. He would make novelty greeting cards, and this would be for someone if their boss died. Yeah.
Yeah, he had a couple dozen of these, all different subjects, all different topics, all with a humorous bent to them. Same thing. He would create them, he would print them, he would walk them around to stores and try to get them stocked in variety stores and card stores and Hallmark stores to see if he could sell a few.
This was kind of like what you'd eventually see with Topps cards when they would do sort of these types of things. And And yeah, so this would go, you'd give this card to someone whose boss just died. Here lies my boss. Oh, what a guy. At last he's resting, and so am I.
Yeah, he was a little bit ahead of his time in terms of his entrepreneurship. He would just try everything. I mean, I don't know if you were going to ask this, so I apologize if I'm jumping ahead, but he would do things like create fake novelty inventions, like glasses with the windshield wipers so that you can walk in the rain, which he actually demonstrated on the Joe Franklin show. Remember Joe Franklin? Of course.
Of course.
Yeah, and he would have hot pants. Hot pants were big in the 70s, I guess, or late 60s, early 70s. And he wore these shorts that whenever a pretty girl would pass by, they would steam up. And he wore those. He wore those on the Joe Franklin show too.
There's a question here that you mentioned Benny was guarded in his business dealings. Are there any stories about bad business deals or attempts to rip him off over the years?
Many.
Yeah.
But with a caveat. Yes, there were many, but they were all in the early part of his career before the novelty stuff broke through, which is why he decided to become his own manager, arranger, producer, publicist, the whole schlemiel. I think I talk a little bit about it in the book. I have some documentation of it from his journal, which is just fascinating to read, about all kinds of contracts that were not clear, contracts that were misleading, contracts that were broken, one or two instances of something of his being stolen, a song or a lyric or a title. You can't copyright a title, but still it stings. Businessmen at some of the big record companies who would make a promise and then not keep it, or who wouldn't even take a meeting with him. He was not allowed to join one of the big music rights agencies because he didn't meet the criteria, and he took it as a personal affront. He had all kinds of things happen to him that soured him against business in general, just the business and show business. He was all show and no business.
And but I was surprised to read in your book that he did wind up in court sometimes. He would take some legal action from time to time, and
yeah, he did. He was smart enough. I mean, he was no dummy. He was a pretty bright guy, even though you'd never know it because of how goofy he usually was. But he knew that when he was being ripped off, he had nothing to lose by trying to have the wheels of justice turn in his favor. So yeah, a few times he went, and a couple times he won. He never won a lot of money, but he had the satisfaction of knowing that he had, decency and righteousness on his side.
There's a question here. Was Benny inspired by Frank Crummett? Crummett was a novelty singer in the 1920s who had quite a bit of success with songs about insurance salesmen, gay caballeros, etc.
That's one name that does not ring too much of a bell. No.
Yeah.
And I probably would have known because I talked to him a lot on his semi-monthly visits to my home and my semi-monthly visits to his apartment in Brooklyn. And as I keep on mentioning his journal and that name, I don't recognize that name. Sorry.
Yeah. And Mark Thorner's asking, Pitkin Avenue in Bushwick? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that rings a bell. That was one of the locations of one of his enterprises, one of his labels, or.
Oh, that must have been on that ad that I put up before. Okay. Now this was Rosemary actually did one of his songs.
This is not a bad song either. It's just that it was too similar to a lot of the other stuff. That was a problem my grandfather had a lot, is he came out with projects that were either a little bit too far behind the times or too similar to what was out at the time. Now this one, Ship Ahoy Sailor Boy, was after World War II. This probably would have been a much bigger hit if the war was still going on when it was released. Rosemary, who used to be Baby Rosemary, a child singer and actress, and of course she was Sally Rogers on the Dick Van Dyke Show. She recorded this song that my grandfather wrote, and I have a signed copy of this sheet music. Is this the one? No, that's not signed. Mine is signed, and I have the original recording, which was a 45. 45s were out by then. And it didn't do very well because there just wasn't a market for boys overseas, wanting their sweethearts wanting them to come home. It just wasn't a thing anymore.
Yeah. Yep. And this, I just put in an example in my file on Benny. he was sending this off to me. Are there any distributors who syndicate short TVs? I just put this in here because this is 1991, and at the age that he was at by this point, he was constantly still doing this work and this hustle, trying to get that next song going.
Yeah, like we said before, he just never gave up until he, because of age, was forced to go into a senior home. Up until that very day, he was doing something every day to try to get himself seen, heard, and laughed at.
And this was from 1975 when Shaving Cream was a big hit. This was a program from one of our live shows at Caroline's, and I'm going to show a clip of that in a moment.
Oh, good. Yeah, I was at that show.
Okay. He was very well received, as we'll see. And this was when he appeared on Oddville MTV, and I have to say that this was with Kevin Smith and Joey Lauren Adams, and one of his 2 appearances. And I remember, we would shoot a bunch of shows a day. I don't know, maybe we were doing like 3 or 4 a day, and there were so many guests on every show. And for me, I was just so thrilled to be featuring Benny Bell on MTV. That was the thing in my head that day, that, wow, we're getting Benny Bell on MTV in 1995, 96, whenever that was.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. MTV, my grandfather.
And this was his second appearance, and he's there. There was some people with a pig act there, and yeah,
that's not kosher.
And this was taken backstage, and probably not too long before Benny's passing. I guess this was 90. Yeah, this was around 95, 96.
Yeah, probably 2 years before he passed.
Yeah. Yep. So Joel, I thought I'd show clips, of his appearance.
Sure.
We'll start with our Beyond Vaudeville episode, where he appeared with Tiny Tim and others. And
our next guest also recently was performing with Tiny Tim, and we've been looking for him for so many years because I've been a big fan of his, and we're very happy to welcome Mr. Shaving Cream himself, Benny Bell. Hello, Mr. Bell. How are you? Thank you for coming. And
pleasure to be here.
Just grab a seat. There's a Mr. Tiny Tim and Mr. Huggy Bear. And well, if you want to just grab a seat right on the end there, and there's a mic right there on the couch. And now, please, would you like to sing standing up or sitting down, or?
Yeah, I can sit down.
Okay.
Put this on my lapel.
There you go. Now, Mr. Bell has been performing for many years, and Shaving Cream he's known for, but he did lots of funny songs. And actually, the first song you wrote, Mr. Bell, was "Take a Ship for Yourself," right?
That's correct.
The very first song, and that was when.
I think that was technically his first novelty song as Benny Bell.
Who's going to argue?
Yeah, well, and when we were doing these shows, we didn't have access to the internet, and we didn't have access to this. So, yeah.
When did you write that? When did you write that song?
In 1940, I believe.
Wow.
And it was banned. They picked up a lot of jukeboxes.
Okay.
Banned.
And maybe you can give us a little bit of that song?
Take a battleship, an excursion ship, or a fishing ship will do. And if you can't take a big ship, then take a small canoe. Bon voyage to you, my friend. I'll meet you at the journey's end. If you like briny seas rolling way down to sea, and go take a ship for yourself. So.
Okay. Now, very good, Mr. Bell. And now, Mr. Bell, who was that lady I saw you with last night?
That was no lady. That was my brother. He walks like that.
Oh, boy. But if you were a doctor, would you endorse cigarettes for $1,000?
For $1,000, I would endorse opium.
Oh, okay. We rehearsed that before, and maybe we should go on the road.
I'm guessing there were one-liners like that constantly in the
Constantly,
house.
yes. And he was pretty quick too. Those, of course, were canned and rehearsed. But you would be amazed if we had a time machine. We're able to go back to the 60s and the 70s in my house when I was a kid. He would come up with a one-liner on the spot like that, based on something somebody said.
Together, Mr. Bell.
Now my tune-up song, can I?
Oh, please.
Said a little red rooster to the little red hen, you haven't laid an egg since heaven knows when. Said a little red hen to the little red rooster, you don't come around as often as you used to.
Now,
I'm amazed at there's just always another song coming out of him. You know, it's like no matter how many recordings I've heard of his, it's like there's just always another thing. It's like his mind was just constantly working.
Oh, it was. That's the one thing that you would take out of a trip back in time to see him. The amount of musical knowledge that just spilled forth from his brain. Not only the 900 songs that he wrote, but the 1900 that he knew from other songwriters of the era.
And I love how he would do his own instrumentation too when he would do these a cappella numbers.
Yeah, he would always have a little trumpet stinger or something like that. He would do the drums with his voice and all kinds of things like that. It was amazing.
now, Mr. Bell, I have two of your albums that you did. One is Kosher Comedy. With the Subway song and Oi Marie and It's a Boy, and then this one came out more recently on the Vanguard label. This has Shaving Cream and all the big hits, and this became a big hit again, right, in the 1970s?
Well, it resurfaced the 2 times in the past. It was a very big hit in 1945. And the police cracked down. That was supposed to be a dirty song. They picked up the jukeboxes. And then it resurfaced again with Cousin Brucey.
Okay.
The Mentos started it off. And maybe you're going to do the same thing now.
Well, we'll see. This might be a whole new wave again for people who still haven't heard Shaving Cream. And Tiny, do you remember Mr. Bell from years ago when he made his records back in the 40s, right?
Well, frankly, I didn't, but I remember Shaving Cream, and he's right. At the time, it was a very risky song, but he does it so great. When he did the Dr. Demento show, I mean, I just told him back there before we came on that he should re-record it today because the voice is still great.
It's fabulous, and he's also New York's own. You're from you live in Brooklyn now, Mr. Bell.
On the Lower East Side, very low.
And and your father wanted you to be a rabbi originally.
That's right.
And but you said you were going to be a singer.
I'd rather sing Shaving Cream.
Okay, and well, we're glad you decided to do that, Mr. Bell. In fact, when you got
well, I think his dad died when pretty young, right?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So was this kind of the so this wasn't the jazz singer kind of situation where oh, my son, he's doing these risque novelty songs.
No, I'm pretty sure his father never really knew what he eventually went into.
Yeah.
started, you played in movie theaters, right?
Well, I was a professional amateur. Yeah.
Okay.
Everybody wants to know what is a professional amateur. In those days, many years ago, before Vaudeville, before the talkies, neighborhood movie houses used to run amateur contests. Now, there were some neighborhoods where they had no talent. So they'd call up a booking agent, and we would work for them. We would go down, presumably, to be neighborhood boys. If we won, we had to return the winnings.
Okay.
But we always got $3. That was a lot of money in those days.
Wow.
Professional amateurs.
And now, Mr. Huggy Bear and Ika, have you heard the Shaving Cream song?
No, I have not.
Oh, it's really special. Can you do any of that, Mr. Bell?
As my last number, I would like to do that.
Okay. Now, you brought an instrument with you. Is that...
Well, that's a banjarine.
Oh, maybe you could...
That's related to Tiny Tim's ukulele.
Oh.
When the ukuleles came out, there was Cliff Edwards, ukulele Ike.
Right.
He was fabulous and inimitable. Nobody could compare to him. So everybody bought ukuleles. I couldn't get one. I bought a banjarine. You'll see it as soon as I get to it.
Okay.
And we had a lot of fun in those days. And I won an amateur contest. I came in second place singing that song with one of my numbers that I hope we'll end up with.
Well, wait.
So, I was hoping to get him to sing Shaving Cream then, but he had his own idea, I'm going to do it later.
Always did.
and we ran out of time because we still had to bring out, coincidentally, we had another performing pig on this show. I don't know how we always teamed up Benny with.
Yeah, you had a performing pig fetish or something. I'm not sure why.
But we ran out of time, so we never got to do Shaving Cream. He never even got to have him, do a song aside from that little rooster song that he did. So afterward, he asked. He said, "I never got to do my song," and we were like, "God, you're right." So we recorded this right after the show, and we never did that before. This was like, but. We knew we had to capture Benny doing Shaving Cream. So here we go.
Okay.
Don't touch that dial, as they say. We now have the inimitable Benny Bell with the inimitable song that made him famous, the one and only Shaving Cream. And maybe you can do that line with the peaches, Mr. Bell?
Right. Pleasure's all mine. Our baby was eating some peaches. We thought that she swallowed a pit. Next morning we looked in her nightie, and we found it all covered with shaving cream. Be nice and clean, shave every day, and you'll always look keen.
I can do one. Okay. An old lady died in her bathtub. She died from a terrible fit. But good luck was with her that morning, 'cause she fell in a barrel of shaving cream. Be nice and clean, shave every day, and you'll always look keen. Can David do a verse?
And now, folks, my story is ended. I think it is time I should quit. If any of you feel offended, stick your head in a bucket of shaving cream. Be nice and clean, shave every day, and you'll always look keen.
Wow, great. The one and only Benny Bell.
Priceless.
Yeah, I'm so glad I'm so glad he made sure that happened. There's a question here. Does Mr. Sandberg have very many of the original master recordings of Benny's? How big is the Benny Bell archive?
Oh, well, I have masters. The actual masters, a lot of them were inadvertently and quite unfortunately destroyed during transit from one house to another. They're very fragile. But I have a small handful of those. Of the pressings of the regular stuff of the songs themselves, I have several dozen of a whole bunch, and then I have dozens of 45s of all different Benny Bell songs. So if you want to make me an offer with 6 zeros at the end of it, just give me a call.
You write in the book about his apartment was kind of legendary, right? It was just packed with stuff. This
Tchotchkes, you know the word tchotchkes, right?
Tchotchkes.
You should. It was Tchotchke Village. No matter where you walked or sat, you would find something, usually musical related. I mean, you would sit on the couch and you'd feel something on your butt, and it would be a harmonica, or you would go to a little candy dish wanting some candy, and you'd lift the thing, and there were 5 or 6 guitar picks in there, and there were tuning forks, and there were capos. Capos are the things that change the keys on a guitar. Or there were, ukuleles and guitars and little horns and recorders, and there was a tape recorder in his bathtub. That's because he had no room in his apartment. So I imagine every time they needed to take a shower, they would have to move that thing. There were microphones next to the toilet. It was like a recording studio in the bathroom. There was his entire apartment on Elton Street, and then later on in Sheepshead Bay, which was the final place that they lived. It was always like that.
Yeah, yeah.
It was wild. It was great. And he taught me to play the guitar. And as a matter of fact, he sold Tiny Tim a ukulele.
Oh, really?
Backstage at one of the shows. I think it was at the what was the one uptown that I told you about before? The Beacon Theater?
They
Beacon
did
Theater.
one at the Beacon, right?
Yeah, he was at the Beacon Theater, and somehow Tiny Tim said his ukulele broke, and my grandfather had a few, so he said, "Oh, I got one." I don't know if he sold it to him or gave it to him. He
Wow.
probably gave it to him. My grandfather was a very generous guy. So yeah, that's.
I remember going to one of the Dr. Demento shows at the Bottom Line down in the Village, where it was like Dr. Demento with Uncle Floyd, Eddie Lawrence, the old philosopher, Bobby Boris Pickett, Tiny Tim, Sheb Woolley, and your dad, who really, held his own. He was a real crowd pleaser. These guys were getting up in age. Sheb Woolley, I remember, very uncomfortably lost his place during one of his songs, and but your dad, your granddad, really delivered that night.
Yeah, he was one hell of a guy.
And he delivered also for us at Caroline's, and I wanted to add that. I have a clip of that too. So let's.
Oh, great!
This is Pat Cooper, who just passed away recently this year, and also in his 90s, but introducing your granddad.
Because the peddler was discovered by a whole new generation of fans with the all-time #1 classic shaving cream. Our next guest is a true show business legend. Let's welcome the incomparable Benny Bell.
You hear him? How do you do, everybody? How do you do? How do you do? It's so nice to be with you. Take my word, it's true. Now before my act is done, I know we'll have a lot of fun. So how do you do? How do you do? You have no idea how happy I am to be here. At my age, 88, I'm glad to be any place. I have a memory like a fish. I don't remember my life. I need a cue sheet like this one. So if I fumble a little bit, forgive me. I'll catch up. Now, first of all, let me remind you that because Monday falls out on Tuesday, this coming Wednesday, the program scheduled for Thursday has been postponed from Friday to Saturday because Sunday is a legal holiday. Remember that. Now, my first number is a jukebox song. When the jukeboxes came out, they never would play this on radio, but on the jukeboxes I got away with it. Almost 50 years ago. Every couple of years it comes by. So let me see. This is it. Don't take a ship for yourself. Remember that one? Every time we take a trip, you always get my goat. I like trains and buses, but you like a ferry boat. Well, the next time we go traveling, ships are out. I now declare, you go your way, I'll go mine. I'll meet you over there. Da 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 da. Go take a ship for yourself. Da 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 da. I'll go by train by myself. Da 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 da. If you can fly in planes, ride in buses or in trains, then go take a ship for yourself. Da da da. Take a battleship, an excursion ship, or a fishing ship will do. And if you can't take a big ship, then take a small canoe. Bon voyage to you, my friend. Da 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 da. I'll meet you at the journeys and da 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 da. If you like briny seas, rolling waves and ocean breeze, then go take a ship for yourself. Da da da. Sailing, sailing over the bonny main. Maybe that gives you pleasure, but it gives me an awful pain. Sailing, sailing. Oh, what a crazy notion to take a little trip out in the middle of the ocean. So go take a ship for yourself. You want to get into the act, ladies and gentlemen? Yeah. You're getting into the act. You're going to be my partner. Now, listen to this. I had... oh, no, there's a phone. I'm taking you in. Now, I'm going to sing the first line. I found an onion, I found an onion, I found an onion just now. Just now I found an onion, just now. And everybody will answer, where'd you find it? Where'd you find it? Where'd you... Not yet. No, wait a minute. Just later. I'm waiting for it. Well, now, where'd you find it? Where'd you find it? Just now. Then I'll tell you, in an ash can, in an ash can, in an ash can, just now. Just now, in an ash can, in an ash can, just now. Then everybody says, what the...
It's really like, it was like a time warp, because just saying ash can, it was
right. Yeah. Yeah. This clip is just a tiny bit sad, only because, as you well know, in the older days, or just 5 years before this, he would have had a guitar in his hand or a ukulele, and he wouldn't have needed a cheat sheet.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I bet the reason he doesn't have a guitar or ukulele is because he knew he needed the cheat sheet and he couldn't do both.
Yeah.
And, so, this shows his aging more than anything else, but he's still engaged with the audience pretty well.
Oh my God, he's still delivering, and I'll let it play out, because it really the crowd just loves him. And but yeah, he had been years earlier. He was playing the Catskills, Saperstein's Farm, Rubenstein's Hotel,
Saperstein's, and the Evans Kaimisha Hotel. He played a lot at.
Yeah,
I stayed there several summers, and I saw him perform there. It was great.
Yeah, he clearly knew how to work the crowd, and with this Onion number, it really it builds.
Yeah, not one of his most famous, but.
What did it taste like? What did it taste like just now? And I'll give you the answer. Are you ready? Here you go. I found an onion, I found an onion, I found an onion just now. Just now I found an onion, I found an onion just now. Where'd you find it? Where'd you find it? Where'd you find it just now? Just now, where'd you find it? Where'd you find it just now? In an ash can, in an ash can, in an ash can just now. Just now, in an ash can, in an ash can just now. What did it taste like? What did it taste like? What did it taste like just now? Just now, what did it taste like? What did it taste like just now? Like an onion, like an onion, like an onion just now. Just now, like an onion, like an onion just now. Well, that comes the jackpot song. Guess what? Yeah, good guess. But you're joining the choruses. I have a sad story to tell you. It may hurt your feelings a bit. Last night when I walked into my bathroom, I stepped in a big pile of shaving cream. Be nice and clean. Shave every day and you'll always look clean. I think I'll break off with my girlfriend. Her manners are rude, I admit. Each time I say, darling, I love you, she tells me that I'm full of shaving cream. Be nice and clean. Shave every day and you'll always look clean. Who needs an orchestra? I once watched a swell game of baseball. The batter, he slammed out a hit. And while he was running to first base, he slipped on a big pile of shaving cream. Be nice and clean. Shave every day and you'll always look clean. Our baby was eating some peaches. We thought that she swallowed a pit. Next morning we looked in her diaper and we found it all covered with shaving cream. Be nice and clean. Shave every day and you'll always look clean. I once watched a funny performance of a Romeo Juliet skit. When Juliet said, "Wherefore art thou?" he replied, "I am taking a shave." Be nice and clean. Shave every day and you'll always look my story is ended. I think it is time I should quit. If any of you feel offended, stick your head in a bucket of shame. Be nice and clean, shave every day, and you'll always look neat.
That guy can bring back plastic surgery. What a wonderful, wonderful thing. My God, great song. They don't write them like that no more. I don't mind. What happened to singing in the rain? My God. Man comes out here talking about shaving, you people going bananas.
Yeah, it's too bad he didn't have a manager or an agent even much later in life, because you know how there's been a couple of movies that take place in the Catskill Mountains, and they all have some goofy MC to lead off every show. My grandfather could have been that character. And he probably gotten some parts in his later life, but you know that was not to be. But
he just always marched to his own beat, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there was just no getting around it.
No, that probably was his destiny, was to run his own life his way.
Yeah, yeah. And so there was a question here from Amy Fruschauer Kelly, who was actually at that show at Caroline's and said he signed a paper for me. And she had a question: how many instruments did Benny play?
That's an interesting question. He obviously played the guitar and the ukulele and the banjo. I don't know that he actually actively played any other instrument, but he knew every instrument because he arranged for every instrument. And as I said at the beginning of the show, he was an excellent arranger. My father played trumpet, and he was a pretty good trumpet player when he was younger. As a matter of fact, when he was like 18 or 19, he had his own band called Jerry Bell, the Jerry Bell Orchestra. So I'm not sure if he learned it from my grandfather, and I never got a chance to ask because now my father is gone as well, but that's quite possible. And as far as we played the piano a little bit. We had a piano in our house on Long Island, and he would sit down and tickle the ivories a little bit. So he wasn't a big instrumentalist player, but he was a consummate musician, and he knew every instrument, and he knew how every instrument worked, and he knew how to write for every instrument.
And the guys that played, were they always the same guys? Were they? I always pictured some kind of klezmer band or something.
Yeah, no. It was in his case, and I know this for a fact because it's actually in his journal. He knew many union musicians throughout the city, and of course he never paid a lot, and he probably paid much less than union wages. So he just tried to call in some favors of guys who liked him, and he got whoever he could get. A lot of guys had gigs all over the city. But out of loyalty and friendship, he got whoever he can get to come down for an hour or 2 hours to his basement studio in Brooklyn. And he would pay them a couple of bucks, and they would record. And sometimes, and this is documented in the journal, sometimes for whatever reason, usually a legitimate professional reason, somebody couldn't show up, and he'd have to rearrange the chart on the fly. to accommodate for that missing instrument, which he would do. And then sometimes he would have to postpone the session. But yeah, it wasn't always the same guys. It was throughout the years, probably a couple dozen different guys.
Yeah, interesting. And we were talking earlier about his jukebox songs, just some of the titles. I wrote down My Janitor's Can, yes. Nice Little Pussy, that doggone window, I can't get it up anymore.
Yes.
Yeah, he just so many of these songs. And
yes, just to be clear, the title of the book that I wrote, which is a half biography, half biography and half memoir of my life with him. As you can see, it's called Grandpa Had a Long One, a title that my mother begged me not to use because she thought I would get in a lot of trouble myself. Just to be clear, that is a reference to the length of his career and his life, and not to the length of anything else necessarily. Although I don't know that for sure.
And the song of his that it was based on, Grandpa Had a Long One, was a very innocent song just about mustaches, right?
No, about noses.
Oh, noses. That was it. There's
As a
another
matter of
song about
fact,
mustaches.
some of the I have a lot of different 45s of that, and some of the labels, as we saw, he made the labels. He always made the labels, so he can put whatever he wanted on the labels. And some of them had Grandpa had a long one, and some of them had noses run in my family, and some of them had Grandpa had a long one with parenthesis underneath the noses song, so that he had, it changed every time he pressed a new batch. Yeah, that's a good song. But my favorite, which we didn't even talk about, was Everybody Loves My Fanny. As cute as Take a Ship for Yourself is, very clever. If you take the time later on after the show to look at the lyrics of Everybody Wants My Fanny, they're really clever and very funny. And to this day, even after having heard them 968,000 times, I still laugh whenever I hear them. And as a matter, do we have time for one quick story here?
Sure, of course.
After my grandfather died, my father did a speaking engagement at a convention, an old time radio convention in Newark. Are you familiar with those?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. He did a speech about my grandfather. He was invited to, and he played a recording of Everybody Wants My Fanny. And even though half the audience already knew it, the laughter that elicited after the record was finished was raucous, was more than I had ever heard before. And I was pleasantly surprised because I grew up with it, so it was nothing new to me. But when I heard that audience reaction, I said, "Man, my grandfather could have been somebody."
I've seen lots of fannies in my time, and frequently their cheeks were close to mine.
Yeah, it's a great song.
When I would play this record as a kid, because he sings my fanny on here. He signed this, by the way, when he appeared on the show.
Oh, nice.
And I was playing this song, Everybody Likes My Fanny, and my mom heard it. And my grandmother's name was Fran. And she said, my dad, who was my grandfather, used to sing that to her like in the 1950s. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, they knew this song, like, in the New York area. I guess, did these songs travel outside the New York area?
Well, that's interesting. When I was doing research for the book and subsequently, I came across a lot of stories of like camps up in the Adirondacks where kids would sit around singing Shaving Cream during, around the fire at night, or different versions of it. And there have been Calypso versions of it. There are records with Calypso bands playing Shaving Cream in a Calypso style. All kinds of things. Yeah, it's traveled around. It's had a life outside of the novelty circuit.
So, Joel, you're a writer yourself. You've written books, novels. You're a columnist, and you have something to share. I teased it earlier about a novel you're working on.
I just completed the third or fourth draft, and it's probably the one that I'm going to send around to publishers and agents, called Jackie Jester. And Jackie Jester is the book, the novel, is loosely based on the career of Benny Bell. It's about a guy named Jack Aronson who finds himself being laughed at when he writes. He goes on a school trip one day when he's like in 10th grade, and they see a boat that a storm the night before had ripped into 1,000,000 pieces, and they brought all the pieces together. The authorities brought all the pieces together and put it on a big barge, and it was in like hundreds and hundreds of pieces. So this Jack Aronson wrote a song the next day called One Big Pile of Ship. And it gets such a good reaction that he thinks, well, maybe there's something in this. And then he writes another one, and he decides to become a songwriter, a novelty songwriter, just like Benny Bell. And he eventually changes his name from Jack Aronson to Jackie Jester because his teacher, he's always goofing off in school. The teacher always calls him the class jester. So he chooses that name. And the book, the novel, is the story of his career up until and he starts a company called Jester Records, and things happen, and I don't want to give too much away, a lot of dramatic things, a lot of surprises. His son, David, eventually grows up, and as people do, and takes over the company, changes it to Cicada Records because he loves the sound of cicadas in the summer. And then something happens where he visits his father, Jackie, when he's the president of Cicada Records, which is now relocated to Los Angeles, and he discovers something that changes the course of his life. So that's the biggest tease I'll give you. And if there's any publishers or agents out there, you know where to find me.
Wow.
You know.
Great. So your grandfather you're keeping his spirit alive, Joel, with this latest book that you're working on,
Yes.
and all the work you've done in just sharing his legacy and sharing that with us all tonight. And I really appreciate your taking the time to do this. And there are, when I was in high school and playing this Benny Bell album, kids wanted to hear Grateful Dead and Led Zeppelin, and I'm like, no, you got to listen to Benny Bell. So he really spoke to some of us, and I was one of them. And I'm glad to have had this opportunity to kind of honor him and share his career. By the way, there's a question here or a statement. My dad and his brothers learned some of those songs at camp. So there you go.
There you go. That's it. Yeah.
One last question we have from Bailey George. Did Benny ever reference people that influenced him? I imagine it would be before recording. So I'm very curious. So there was that question earlier about Crummett, who didn't ring a bell, but anyone else that that might have influenced him?
As I think I mentioned, Irving Berlin, definitely.
Oh, right. Yeah.
As a songwriter.
Yep.
One of his friends was the songwriter of a very successful songwriter named Mitchell Parrish, and he co-wrote a song. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head with Mitchell. I don't know if he was much of an influence as he was an influential friend. And then, of course, there was Dr. Demento and Cousin Brucey for the Resurrection in the 70s. They were very influential to him and very important to him. And you had mentioned Uncle Floyd. Once Uncle Floyd came into the picture, Uncle Floyd, as you probably know, is a superlative piano player. He's really good. And he became my grandfather's favorite accompanist. And from what I recall, there were a few shows where Uncle Floyd was not necessarily supposed to be on the bill, but my grandfather insisted because he wanted him to accompany him. But he was very important too.
Wow.
And yeah.
Well, well, Joel, this has been wonderful, and really, again, thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody who has been joining us here tonight and sharing your questions in chat. Benny's material will live on.
Well, yes, keep it going.
Recordings and our recordings and Joel's upcoming novel, Jackie Jess.
Knock on wood.
Yes. Thanks so much, Joel, and thanks
everybody. Well, Happy New Year.
All right, we'll see you soon.
Okay, thanks.